My name is Merritt Myers. I am 71 years old, and I have lived in the same house for 34 years. I want to tell you about the morning I stood in my kitchen doorway and watched my daughter-in-law take pictures of my wife's dining table. She was not admiring it. She was not running her hand along the wood the way Patricia used to whenever she was thinking. She was photographing it the way a person photographs something before putting it up for sale. She did not hear me come in. She was already typing into her phone, one thumb moving quickly across the screen. She angled the camera, took another shot, adjusted the frame, and moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this before, as if it were part of a job. I stood there for a moment without saying anything. Then I went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and thought about everything I had been telling myself for the past 3 months. I had told myself I was imagining things. I had told myself she meant well. I had told myself Dale would never let anything bad happen. I had been wrong about every part of it. Before I go any further, let me take you back to last March, to the night when everything truly began. The house was Patricia's idea. 3 bedrooms, good bones, and a yard wide enough for a real garden. We were 37 years old then, and we had been saving for 6 years. The day we signed the papers, she cried in the car on the way home. It was not sadness. It was the kind of crying that comes out when something you have wanted for a long time finally becomes real. That was in 1990. We raised 2 children in those rooms. Dale came first, and then Carla 4 years later. Patricia planted roses along the back fence that first spring, and she kept them going for 30 years. They are still there now. Patricia passed away 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer came quickly and did not ask permission. We had 11 months between the diagnosis and the end. I was with her every day of it. I drove her to every appointment, sat in every waiting room, and held her hand through things I could not fix. We did not spend much time being angry about it. We simply used what time we had. After she was gone, I did not change much in the house. Her coffee cups stayed on the shelf above the maker, the blue ones with the small handle she liked. I did not use them. I just left them there. Some things do not need an explanation. Then, last March, I had a small stroke. My doctor called it a thanks in advance, a transient ischemic attack. There was no lasting damage, no paralysis. My speech was fine, my thinking was clear, and my mobility was not affected. But my doctor chose her words carefully. She told me I should not be living alone right then. She told me to avoid prolonged stress and let people help me. Within a week, Dale called. He and his wife, Renee, wanted to move in temporarily. They said they would help with groceries, appointments, and keeping an eye on things. I told him yes. I thought it meant my son wanted to be closer to his father after losing his mother. In my desk drawer, I kept a locked metal box. Inside it were the deed to the house, Patricia's will, and our financial documents. Sandra Oakes, a real estate attorney I had worked with back in my consulting days, had done the title work on this house in 1990. She had been thorough then. I had not spoken to her in 2 years, but I still had her card somewhere. I do not know why I thought about that the night Dale called, but I did. Renee arrived with energy. That is the word I would use. She came through the front door carrying a casserole dish and introduced herself to my next-door neighbor, Walt, before she had even set foot in the kitchen. Within 2 days, she knew the name of the woman across the street, the name of her dog, and the schedule for her hip replacement. Renee was attentive. She made sure I took my medication, cooked real food, and folded dish towels in a way Patricia never would have bothered with. She said things like, "We are going to get you feeling like yourself again," with a certainty that should have been reassuring and somehow was not. But I noticed things early. When my phone rang, Renee often picked it up first. She would say I was resting and ask if she could take a message. I usually was not resting. The messages did not always reach me. She reorganized the kitchen during the first week, moved everything around, and said the layout was not practical. I did not fight her on it. The kitchen had never been my territory. Then one afternoon, she stood in the living room doorway and looked at Patricia's china set. 12 pieces, white with a thin blue border, the set we had used for holidays for 40 years. She asked if I actually used them. I told her not much anymore. She nodded slowly, the way someone nods when a decision has already been made, and they are just waiting for the right moment to act on it. A few days later, my daughter Carla called from Tennessee. I know she called because I saw the missed call later. I had found my own phone charging in the kitchen, in the spot Renee preferred, where she could hear it ring. Renee had answered. She told Carla I was asleep, and said she would have me call back. Carla did not hear from me that day. I did not even know she had called until 3 weeks later, when I found an old number in Patricia's address book and finally reached her. But that came later. The furniture came first. Dale left for work early and came home late. When he was home, he was tired. The kind of tired that keeps a man from looking directly at you. We had dinner together most nights. We talked about the weather, his commute, and a sports team neither of us followed very closely. It was the kind of conversation people have when they have silently agreed not to have the other conversation waiting underneath it. I noticed the wing chair first. Patricia had bought it at an estate sale in 2003. It had dark green fabric and solid arms. I used to read in it on Sundays, with the floor lamp pulled close. One morning, it was gone. I asked where the chair was at breakfast. Dale looked up from his phone, then looked at Renee. Renee said they had given it to someone who needed it. She said they were ordering me a new one with better lumbar support, because the old chair was not good for my back. I waited 2 weeks. No chair arrived. I did not push it. I told myself one chair was not worth an argument. I was staying in my son's goodwill, and I did not want to seem like a difficult old man. That is a particular kind of shame, the fear that your own reasonable feelings will be used against you. Instead of arguing, I started paying attention. I noticed that when Renee made phone calls, she walked to the far end of the hallway. I noticed she checked the lock on my filing cabinet twice in 1 week, casually, the way someone checks something when they want to check it without being seen. I noticed that she introduced herself to service workers as Merritt's caregiver, a word I had never heard her use when she was talking to me. Walt tried to visit twice that first month. Both times, Renee met him at the door and told him I was resting. Walt Greer had been a county sheriff's deputy for 22 years before he retired. He was not easily managed. Even so, both times he left without seeing me. That was the week I found Patricia's address book in the nightstand drawer. The oak sideboard came next. It had belonged to Patricia's grandfather. It was dark wood with wide brass drawer pulls she kept polished. She had moved it from apartment to apartment and then into every house we ever owned. I used to tease her about it, and she would say that things worth keeping were worth caring for. One Tuesday morning, it was gone. In its place was a gap along the dining room wall that looked wrong, like a missing tooth in a familiar face. Renee already had an answer ready. She said a collector had come by, offered good money, and she had not wanted to wake me. She said it was just furniture. I told her that sideboard had belonged to Patricia's grandfather. Her voice softened in a way I had started to recognize, a studied gentleness that arrived right on schedule whenever I pushed back. She told me Patricia would have wanted me to be comfortable, not surrounded by things that made me sad. I did not answer. By then I had learned that answering Renee was not the same as having a conversation with her. That same evening, she sat across from me at the dining table, the one she had not touched yet, and very casually mentioned that she had been talking to a real estate attorney. She said there was something called a life estate. She said it was simple. I would keep living in the house, everything would stay the same, and it would simply make sure the house went to Dale when the time came. No probate headaches, no delays. She slid a brochure across the table. I looked at it without picking it up. She told me it was something to think about, and she smiled. I did not say yes. I want that understood clearly. I did not say yes. I stood up, folded my napkin, and said I was tired. But I was not tired. I was thinking about Walt. The next afternoon, Renee drove to the pharmacy, and as soon as her car cleared the driveway, I walked next door. Walt Greer has lived beside me for 19 years. He is a solid man, not tall, with a white mustache, and the kind of stillness that comes from spending 2 decades in situations that required it. He poured coffee without asking whether I wanted any and set the cup in front of me. I told him everything. I told him about the chair, the sideboard, Renee's phone calls, the life estate brochure, Carla not being able to reach me, the way Renee introduced herself to service workers, and the filing cabinet. Walt listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, the way he used to go quiet when he was organizing information. Then he asked if the document box was still locked. I said yes, and told him I was the only one with the key. He asked if I was sure there was not a second key. I was not sure. That thought landed cold. Walt asked a few more questions, methodically and without urgency. Then he leaned back and told me I owned that house. He said I had the right to put a camera in the common areas, the living room, and the hallway, but not in a bedroom or bathroom. He said Virginia law was clear. I told him I did not want to spy on my son. Walt told me I was not spying on my son. I was protecting my house. There was a real difference between those two things, and he let me sit with that until I could see it. He offered to help me set it up. A small camera, battery-powered, no wires, positioned behind the bookshelf. An app on my phone so I could check the feed from my room. I drove home and pulled into my driveway. Through the front window, I could see Renee on the phone. The moment she saw my car, she moved into the hallway. The clock had hung on the wall beside the kitchen doorway for 11 years. Patricia picked it out herself. It was a dark-framed round clock. Simple, not fancy. On our 35th anniversary, she had the back engraved. I had read the inscription so many times I could write it from memory. For every hour we've had and every one still coming. P. She gave it to me a few months later and said she wanted to see me hang it herself. So I got the step stool right then, in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, and hung it while she watched from the kitchen doorway. One Thursday morning, I came downstairs and the wall was bare. The nail was still there, along with a small circle of faded paint where the frame had protected the wall for 11 years. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, then put on coffee. When Renee came down, I asked about it. She said the ticking had been loud, and she had noticed it was disrupting my sleep. She said she had taken it to be repaired at a little place on Garfield. I asked which shop exactly. She said she did not remember the exact name, only that it was small and very reputable. The clock never came back. After lunch, I went to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, the same spot where I later sat when I watched her photograph the dining table. I did not cry. I just sat there and thought about the weight of something that small. $85, as I found out later. That evening, while Renee was watching television, she left her phone on the counter. The screen lit up with a resale app notification from her account. I recognized the description in the listing. I photographed it with my own phone and did not say a word. Then I texted Walt. I told him I needed that camera. Walt came over 2 mornings later while Renee and Dale were both out. The camera was small, about the size of a deck of cards, white, battery-powered. He had ordered it the same day I texted him, and it had arrived the next morning. We positioned it behind a row of hardcover books on the living room shelf, angled to cover the front door, the hallway entrance, and the dining room table. The line of sight was clean. The bedroom door was out of frame. The bathroom was out of frame. Walt was precise about it. He walked me through the app, showed me the motion detection settings, and taught me how to pull up archived footage by date. My phone was older, but after a few minutes of adjustment, it handled the app fine. I asked how long it recorded. He told me 30 days before the cloud looped and said I should download anything I wanted to keep. I looked at the shelf. You could not see the camera. I knew exactly where it was, and I still could not see it. Walt left before noon. I sat in the armchair, a different one, because the green chair was already gone, and thought about what it meant to be in my own living room, setting up surveillance in my own house because I had to. The first 3 days were ordinary. Renee cooked, moved around the house, came and went. Dale passed through. Nothing happened that I had not already seen with my own eyes. I started to wonder whether I was wrong about all of it, whether I was an old man building a case out of coincidences, letting grief make me suspicious of people who were just trying to help. I had that thought more than once during those 3 days. Then the 4th day came. I was resting after lunch when the motion alert went off. I picked up my phone and opened the feed. Renee was in the living room. She thought she was alone. She was on the phone, pacing slowly near the window. She was not exactly whispering, just speaking low, the way you speak when you think a house is empty. I turned up the phone volume and pressed it close to my ear. The words came through clearly enough. She said I did not suspect anything. She said to keep it slow. She said she needed a few more weeks before putting the papers in front of me. Then there was a pause while she listened. She said Dale's name. She said she knew. She said I was not going to fight it because I was not that type. Then she said to let her handle the timing. I listened to that clip 3 times. The 3rd time, I made sure I was hearing what I thought I was hearing. There was no charitable interpretation I could find. I put the phone down on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling. Then I took out a yellow legal pad, the kind Patricia used to use for grocery lists, and started writing. Date, time, and what had been said. I was not sure yet what I would do with any of it, but I knew memory was something people could argue with, and writing was not. That night, I went looking for Renee's resale account again. I had saved the screenshot from when she left her phone on the counter. I found the account and scrolled through recent sales. The second listing from the top was a vintage round wall clock, dark wood frame, excellent condition, price $85, status sold. I wrote that down too. Date, time, item price, $85. I closed the app, set the phone face down on the nightstand, and looked at the legal pad on the desk in the corner before I turned off the light. It was the most useful thing in the room. I waited for a night when Dale came home at a reasonable hour. I asked him to talk, just the 2 of us. I said it clearly, looking straight at him while Renee was still in the kitchen. He nodded. We moved to the back porch. Before we had said 2 sentences, the screen door opened, and Renee stepped out with a glass of water no one had asked her to bring. She sat down without being invited, set the glass in front of me, and folded her hands in her lap with the patience of someone who intended to stay. I asked about the clock. I asked about the life estate papers. I asked why Carla had not been able to reach me in 2 months. Dale looked at the porch floor, then at Renee. Renee answered. She said I was under stress, that the doctor had recommended calm, and that they were only trying to protect me from decisions made in an emotional state. She said the life estate was standard practice, and that many families in our situation did exactly this. She said Carla called at inconvenient times, and the messages had always been passed along. I looked at Dale while Renee was talking. He did not correct a single thing, she said. I told them I had not said yes to any papers, and I wanted that understood. Renee told me, of course, no one was rushing me. Dale started to say something. Renee touched his arm. He stopped. I stood up, said I was tired, and went inside. The next morning, I went to Patricia's nightstand and took out the small address book she had kept since 1987. It had alphabetical tabs and handwritten entries, with the ink faded on the older pages. Carla's number, her old Tennessee landline, was under the M tab. I put the book in my jacket pocket and walked to Walt's house. Walt handed me his phone without asking why. I dialed. Carla picked up on the 3rd ring. When she heard my voice, she went quiet for a moment. Then came a long exhale, the kind that means something has been held in too long. She told me she had called 11 times. I told her I knew. She said Renee kept saying I was asleep, or in therapy, or that the doctor had restricted visitors. I sat with that for a moment. Then I told her everything, the same way I had told Walt, methodically. I told her about the furniture disappearing piece by piece, Renee answering my phone, controlling who came to the door, the life estate papers being prepared before I had agreed to anything, and the footage from the camera. Carla listened without interrupting. She has always been the practical one, the one who needs the facts before she reacts. Her first question was whether I still had the deed in the document box. I told her yes, that it was locked and I had the only key. Then Carla told me Dale had texted her 6 weeks earlier. He had said I was in a fragile emotional state and might be considering signing some estate paperwork, and that it would be better for everyone if she did not get involved. She paused, then said she had almost listened to him and was glad she had not. She had already called a friend in Nashville who practiced real estate law. That friend had explained exactly what a life estate deed transferred and, just as importantly, what it permanently removed from the grantor. Carla told me she was flying in that weekend. I told her not to tell Dale she was coming. She said she had already figured that part out. I handed the phone back to Walt. He refilled our coffee. We sat on his porch for a few minutes without talking, the way you sit with someone when there is nothing left to say that is not better said with silence. When I got home, I opened the camera app. There was a new motion event from 42 minutes earlier. Renee was standing at my filing cabinet, both hands on the sides of the drawer, testing it again. The lock had held. 3 days later, Renee and Dale sat down with me after dinner. It was not spontaneous. They had cleared the dishes together, refilled my water, and then pulled out chairs at the same time with the coordination of a rehearsed move. The kitchen had that particular stillness that comes right before someone says something they have been saving. Renee set a folder on the table. It was the life estate deed, already printed, already filled in. My name was in the grantor line. Dale's name was below it, with Renee listed as co-grantee. She said they had an attorney review it. She said it was straightforward. She said I would keep full use of the house and nothing would change day to day, but it would protect Dale and the family from probate complications later. I looked at the document, then at Dale. He was watching the edge of the table. I turned to the last page. A date had already been typed into the acknowledgement block. 2 weeks out. The notary's name was pre-filled. The signature lines were blank, but everything else was complete, as though the only missing piece was my name. Someone had been planning this long before that dinner. I said I would read it carefully. Renee said they had already had it reviewed, and that it was really a formality at that point. I looked up and said again that I would read it carefully. She stopped. Dale did not speak. I picked up the folder, thanked them for dinner, and walked to my room. I locked the door, sat at the small desk by the window, and read every page. Then I sat for a while. Then I took out my phone and texted Carla, asking her to fly in earlier if she could. Her response came back in 4 minutes. She had already changed the ticket. She would land Friday morning. She told me not to tell Dale. I looked at the pre-filled notary stamp again, and thought about what it meant that someone had put a date on a paper before anyone had agreed to anything. Thursday night, I sat at my desk and went through everything. 6 weeks of footage, organized by date. I watched the important clips in sequence. Renee at the back door at 6:40 inches in the morning on a Tuesday. The alley door, the one that opened behind the hedges. She made 2 trips carrying the sideboard's brass drawer pulls wrapped in newspaper. She had a bag already waiting out there. It had been pre-planned. Renee at my filing cabinet late on 2 separate nights. Both times, she pulled the upper drawer and tested the lock. Both times, the lock held. The second night, she tried a key from her own keychain. It did not work. Renee on the phone, saying I did not suspect anything. And then the last one. Renee and Dale in the hallway, voices low. Dale asked what would happen if I called Sandra. Renee said I had not spoken to Sandra in 2 years and would not call her. Dale asked what if I still would not sign. Renee said I would sign, and she just needed more time. I watched that exchange 3 times. Then I copied the key clips to a USB drive and took it to Walt's house before anyone in mine was awake. He kept the backup in his desk. We agreed he would hold it for 30 days, no questions asked. At 9 that morning, I called Sandra Oakes. Sandra was a real estate attorney. We had worked together on property closings back in my consulting days 20 years earlier. She was sharp, thorough, and she did not forget things. I had not spoken to her in 2 years. Just as Renee had correctly guessed, she picked up on the second ring. I gave her the short version. She asked 3 questions, then told me she could be there Saturday afternoon. I told her to bring her calendar. That evening, Carla texted me from the airport. She said she was landing the next morning at 8 and told me not to open the door for anyone before she got there. I slept better than I had in months. Carla rang the doorbell at 9:15 Friday morning. Renee opened it. I was standing at the kitchen doorway, close enough to see. The expression on Renee's face lasted maybe 2 seconds before it rearranged itself into warmth, but I caught it. That half second of recalculation, like a program adjusting to unexpected input. Renee said they had not known Carla was coming. Carla said she did not know she needed to announce it and stepped inside. She hugged me for a long time. Then she pulled back and looked at my face the way she has looked at it her whole life, reading it the way she learned from her mother. She glanced around the living room without saying anything. Her eyes stopped at the wall where the sideboard used to be, then moved to the bare hook beside the kitchen door. She took in the room the way someone takes inventory. She looked at me. I quietly told her we would talk later. Dale came downstairs and saw his sister. The color left his face in a way that answered a question I had not needed to ask out loud. He knew exactly what her presence meant, even if he did not know the specifics. Renee managed breakfast. The four of us sat around the dining table, the one she had not sold, the one Patricia had chosen at a warehouse showroom in 1994 because the wood was real and not veneer. There was a careful politeness at that table that felt like the air before a storm, still, clear, and pressurized. Sandra called at 11. I stepped into the hallway to take it and kept my voice low. When I came back to the table, Renee was watching me with an attention she no longer bothered to disguise. I sat down and told everyone I wanted them there at 2 that afternoon because there was something I needed to go over. Sandra Oakes arrived at 2 o'clock. I met her at the door before anyone else could and walked her to the small sitting room off the hallway, the one with the bookshelf and the window facing the garden. I asked her to wait until I came for her. Then I went to the dining room. All four of us sat around Patricia's table. Renee had made coffee and set out cups, the details of hospitality. Even then, she waited maybe 30 seconds before placing the folder on the table. She said she knew the timing felt complicated with Carla there, but they had already delayed this longer than they should have, and she started to say something about an attorney's window for filing. I said her name, and she stopped. I told her I had a question first. She waited with the patience of someone who expected to handle whatever came next. I asked about the clock Patricia had given me on our 40th anniversary, the one Renee had said she took to be repaired on Garfield Street. I asked her the name of the shop. There was silence. I told her I had looked up every business on Garfield, and there was no clock repair shop on that block. There had not been one in at least 8 years. Renee began to say she did not know what I meant. I told her it had been listed on her resale account. Vintage round wall clock, dark wood frame, $85. Dale looked up from his coffee. Carla stayed very still. She had been still since we sat down, watching. Renee's voice became careful. She said she did not know where I was getting that information, but she thought there had been a misunderstanding. I told her I would show her exactly where I was getting it. The laptop was already open on the counter behind me. I had set it there before they sat down. I brought it to the table, turned it so everyone could see, and pressed play. The first clip showed Renee at the back door before dawn, making 2 trips to the alley with items wrapped in newspaper. The second showed her at the filing cabinet, both hands on the drawer, testing the lock at 10:30 at night. The third was the phone call, with her saying I did not suspect anything and to keep it slow. The last was the hallway conversation, with her saying I would sign and she just needed to handle the timing. Dale's face changed in a way I had not expected. He was not looking at Renee. He was hearing his own voice from 3 weeks earlier, hearing his own words, and I could see from his expression that he had not anticipated this. Some part of him had believed the situation would resolve differently. Renee stood up and said it was a violation of something. I told her to sit down. My voice was level. I told her it was my house, and I had placed the camera in my own living room. I told her that was legal in Virginia, and the attorney I had called that morning had confirmed it. Then I looked at Dale and told him to keep watching. He watched. When the last clip ended, I closed the laptop. Nobody spoke for a moment. Outside, a car passed on the street. The refrigerator made its usual sound. The afternoon light came through the window at an angle that caught the surface of Patricia's table. Then I called Sandra. Sandra Oakes stepped in from the hallway. She was 60, composed, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She had been in that room for the better part of 3 hours without making a sound. She introduced herself to Dale and Renee by name and profession. She said she had reviewed the life estate deed they had prepared. She explained in plain terms what the document transferred and what it permanently removed from my control, including my ability to refinance, sell, borrow against the property, or rescind the arrangement without Dale's signed cooperation. She said that under Virginia law, any deed signed under conditions of undue influence could be challenged and voided in probate court. She said she had now personally reviewed footage documenting a month-long pattern of behavior in this household. Then she said she would be direct. If that deed were signed and later contested, what she had seen would be central to that proceeding, and she wanted everyone in the room to understand that clearly. Renee's expression had gone very still. The soft management she had used for months, the patient redirections, the ready explanations, none of it worked anymore, and she was smart enough to know it. I looked at her directly. I told her she had come into my house and told my son, my neighbors, and anyone who asked that she was there to take care of me. I told her what she had actually done was sell my wife's things, block my daughter's calls, and draft paperwork to transfer ownership of my home before I understood what she was asking me to sign. I let that sit. Then I said I was not signing that document. I would not sign it then, and I would not sign it at any point in the future. I told her I needed her out of the house within the week. Renee opened her mouth and started to tell me that was not what this was. I told her I was not finished. She stopped. I turned to Dale. He was looking at the table. He looked the way a person looks when they have been hoping for a different outcome and finally understand it is not coming. I told him I loved him, and that had not changed. I waited until he looked up. Then I told him he had been in that house while this was happening. He had sent his sister a message telling her to stay away from her own father. He had sat across from me on the porch and let Renee speak for him instead of telling me the truth. I did not say it with heat. I said it the way you say things that need to be said and then left standing. I told him he had 1 week to decide. If he wanted to remain in the house, he would remain on my terms, and those terms started with honesty. If he went with Renee, I would understand. But the conversation about the property was finished, permanently. Dale looked at me for a long moment. He did not look at Renee first. Then he said, "Yes, sir." It was the first time in his adult life he had ever said that to me. Renee gathered the folder from the table. She said something about family, about being misunderstood, about what she had been trying to do. I let her finish. When she was done, I told her I had heard her. That was all. Carla did not speak through any of it. She sat with her hands flat on the table and watched. When it was over, she reached over and put one hand on top of mine. She did not need to say anything. Sandra stayed another hour. She walked me through the steps for changing the locks, recovering spare keys, and maintaining documentation going forward. She left her card under the fruit bowl on the kitchen counter. The house was very quiet after she left. I stood in the kitchen looking at the wall where the clock used to hang. I thought clearly that I was not anyone's asset. I did not say it out loud. I had already said everything that needed to be said. Renee did not come downstairs that evening. Sandra had barely pulled out of the driveway when I heard the bedroom door close upstairs. It was not slammed, just shut with a finality that said whatever conversation remained was happening on Renee's terms now, not anyone else's. I let it be. There was nothing useful left to say. Before Sandra left, she had given me a short list. Change the locks within 24 hours. Retrieve any spare keys currently in the house or with anyone connected to Renee. Verify the document box that evening. She said it in the practical tone of someone who had seen what happened when people waited on those steps. Carla and I went through the document box that night at the kitchen table. The deed, Patricia's will, insurance documents, property tax records going back 20 years. Every page was accounted for. Carla exhaled slowly and said it was all there. We sat for a while. She made tea. Outside the window, the roses were still out, the late ones along the back fence that come back every fall. Carla said Dale had known what was happening. I said yes. She said he had sent her that message specifically to keep her away. I said yes again. She looked at the table and asked how long I had known. I told her I knew something was wrong within the first month, but I kept waiting until I was certain. I kept thinking maybe I was a suspicious old man. Maybe I was not reading it right. Then I paused, because that is a particular kind of doubt, the kind that uses your own decency against you. Carla looked at me and told me I was not a suspicious old man. I agreed, I was not. Dale came to my door after 10 o'clock. He knocked, then opened it, and stood in the doorway. I could see from his face that he had been sitting somewhere in the house, working himself up to this for a while. He told me he was sorry. Not an explanation, not a defense, not a list of pressures and circumstances, just those words. I sat with them for a moment. The anger I might have felt earlier had settled into something that felt more like grief, for the version of my son I had assumed I knew, and some relief that he was still the kind of person who could stand in a doorway and say what was true. I told him I knew he was scared about the money. He nodded. I told him that was a problem he would have to solve, and I could not solve it for him. I would not solve it by signing the house over. He said he knew. He did not go upstairs to Renee that night. He slept in the guest room. In the morning, I called the locksmith. Renee packed over 2 days. She moved through the house efficiently, without drama, room by room. She did not engage with me directly. Everything passed through Dale, quiet exchanges in the kitchen. Logistics reduced to their minimum. She was, in her way, professional about it. I gave her the space. There was nothing useful left to be said between us, and filling the quiet would have helped no one. On the second morning, while she was loading the car, I walked through the kitchen and found a spare key hanging on the hook by the back door. A hook I had stopped checking because it had been empty for so long that I had forgotten it was there. I took the key down, set it on the counter, and added it to the ones I had already collected. That afternoon, the locksmith came and rekeyed every exterior lock. I watched him work and did not feel anything complicated about it. Dale came to me the morning he was ready to leave. We stood in the kitchen. He had been up early. I could see it in his face. He told me he was going with her. I told him I knew. He said he was going to handle the debt. He said he would figure it out without involving any of this, and he gestured toward the house without quite meeting my eyes. I told him I hoped he did. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he had been afraid. He had let her convince him there was no other way. He said that was not her fault, that it had been his choice. I said yes, it had. He nodded. He did not argue it. I put my hand out. He shook it. It was not a warm moment, but it was an honest one. I learned long ago to value honest moments over performed ones. He walked out to the car. Renee was already in the passenger seat, looking forward. They drove away. I stood in the doorway until the car turned the corner. Carla stood beside me. We watched until there was nothing left to watch. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was getting there. Carla stayed a full week. We painted the living room a pale green Patricia had always talked about but never gotten around to. We rearranged the furniture, opened the windows, and let the October air in. I bought a good armchair, a real one with proper arms. On the fourth day, while we were reorganizing the kitchen desk, I found something. A second spare key to the filing cabinet had been taped to the back of the shallow drawer. Renee had found it. She had never gotten the combination to the interior lock, so she had gotten no further. I changed the combination anyway. Then I made coffee. 2 months passed, the way days pass when you have been braced for something for a long time and the bracing is finally over. They move differently. Not faster, not slower, just more like they are supposed to. I hired a part-time helper named Margaret. She was in her mid-50s, came 3 mornings a week, helped with grocery runs and appointments, had no connection to my family, and no stake in anything I owned. She was practical and a little funny, and she minded her own business. Those turned out to be the most important qualities in a person helping me at that point in my life. Carla called every Sunday. The calls ran 30 to 40 minutes. We talked about her kids, her job, and the garden in Tennessee that she was fighting the deer over with varying results. She said she thought she might come for Thanksgiving. I told her I would have the dining table cleared by the time she landed. Dale texted once in early October. He said he and Renee were working with a financial counselor and that he had made some arrangements on the debt. He said he hoped I was doing well. I wrote back that I was glad to hear it and told him to take care of himself. I did not ask about Renee. He did not offer. Sandra helped me update my will. Nothing changed in terms of who would receive what. The house would still go to Dale and Carla equally, because that had always been the plan, and it was still the right one. But we added clear language about the conditions of that inheritance, about who held power of attorney and under what circumstances, about which decisions required a co-signature and what documentation would be required. I wanted the document to do the work of a conversation I would not always be around to have. Patricia's china set was still in the cabinet, 12 pieces, white with a thin blue border. Renee had never gotten to it. I took the set out one Sunday and washed every piece by hand. Then I put them back exactly where they had always been. One afternoon, a package arrived from Tennessee. I carried it in from the front step and opened it at the kitchen table. It was a clock, round, dark wood frame, simple and well made. On the card, in Carla's handwriting, it said, "For every hour ahead, love, C." I stood on the step stool and hung it where the other one had been. It was not the same clock. Nothing would be. But it told the same time. That evening, I made coffee and brought it out to the front porch in Patricia's blue cups, the ones I had left on the shelf for 3 years without using. I sat out there until the light changed. Walt came over around 7, and we shared a beer on the porch steps the way we used to before any of this started. That was a good evening. People ask me sometimes whether I regret how I handled things, whether I wish I had said something earlier, whether I feel guilty for how it affected Dale. Here is what I have come to understand. I waited as long as I did because I was afraid of being a particular kind of old man, the suspicious one, the difficult one, the one who sees threats where there are only inconveniences. I had spent 40 years letting my wife navigate the emotional waters of this family, and when she was gone, I did not have a chart for it anymore. I second-guessed myself. I talked myself out of my own instincts more than once, because I thought my age and my grief were distorting my judgment. They were not. Being willing to be wrong is not a weakness, but letting that willingness become a door that other people can walk through costs you something real. It cost me time, Patricia's grandfather's sideboard, her clock, and 3 months of not speaking to my daughter. Here's what I know now. Aging does not remove your rights. It does not make your home someone else's asset. It does not mean the people around you automatically know what is better for you than you do. You can be 71 years old, living alone after a mild health scare, and still be the most reliable judge of what is happening in your own life. I found my limits late, but I found them. When the moment came, I did not shout. I did not threaten. I made phone calls. I kept notes. I asked someone I trusted to help me. I sat down at my own dining table and said what was true to the people who needed to hear it. That was all it took. That is usually all it takes. I still live in this house. It is still the house, Patricia cried over in the car on the drive home from closing in 1990. The blue coffee cups are still on the shelf above the maker. A new clock tells the same time on the same wall. The table is still in the middle of the room. Some mornings, I sit at it early before the day gets moving. I drink my coffee and look out at the garden. The roses are still going, late season, the ones Patricia planted, coming back on their own, the way they always have. That is enough. That is more than enough. Thank you for listening.